NBA Live Before Lock here, right here at Awesemo.com as we get you ready for today's playoff action. 2 games tonight. Adam, how's it going, man?
How's it going? Should be a pretty fun slate to talk about, I think. 2 games that, I think should be pretty good, pretty entertaining to watch from an actual basketball standpoint.
I will tell you, I was watching you and Josh earlier today on the strategy show, and I was like, all right, me and Adam are on the same page of riding this Jimmy Butler train.
Yeah, kind of a frustrating place to be sometimes, but looks like a pretty favorable price point across the industry. And he says that the shoulder injury that he dealt with last game is no longer an issue. So assuming he's fully good to go.
I would tell you, when I started this morning just hand building lineups, not going with Fantasy Cruncher, the thing that really stuck out to me was like, oh my goodness, I've got too many Heat players in my lineup.
Yeah, I think the pricing on Miami is really favorable. That's been what I noticed. And then also that, especially if you're just kind of building an optimal and looking at medium projections, there's a lot of really bad players that get in the lineup too.
I will tell you, the one Heat player I'm not on, and I know we're on the same page on this one, is Iggy. I know it's cheap, but man, I'd rather, if I'm going to go with a cheap Miami player, give me Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah, I mean, in tournaments for sure, I'm on the same page. Like in cash games, just eat the chalk on Iguodala. He probably plays upper 20s in minutes, and he's really cheap. But yeah, it's Josh and I talked about it this morning. It's just the range of outcomes is when you factor in point per minute production isn't that different amongst really any of these really cheap guys, and all the ownership going to Iggy because his medium projection is slightly better on a point per dollar basis in tournaments doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So he's definitely one of those guys where if I'm just crunching a lineup and getting the highest projected lineup I can, you're going to get to Iggy, but that's what's driving his ownership up. And you're talking about a player that isn't really involved in anything that matters for DFS. He's the 5th scoring option whenever he's on the floor. He's not facilitating. He's not, they're not running the offense through him whatsoever. And he's not getting rebounds over guys like Bam. So it's, just because he's playing those minutes, he obviously has opportunity. And that's kind of all you can ask for in some instances. But when you're trying to win tournaments, especially when the ownership is projected to be as high as it is, I think that it's a pretty good idea to be, maybe taking on some risk on other cheap guys that have a similar ceiling.
I thought another great point that you brought up earlier today is about Bam, because Bam's going to most likely be highly owned, especially on FanDuel. The fact of if somehow he gets in early foul trouble, that's where if you're a Kelly Olynyk backer, you feel like, man, that's going to create some great value for you.
Yeah, and it's something that, obviously you're not projecting that to happen, but it's certainly in the range of outcomes. You expect Bam to be tasked with defending Giannis quite a bit here. And so obviously that risk is there. But with it being a 2-game slate and the value being as questionable as it is, and it's something that Josh and I had talked about this morning too, the point per minute production from Olynyk is just so much higher than any of these other cheap guys that you're going to talk about, whether it's Iguodala, Marvin Williams from the Milwaukee side, Wes Matthews from the Milwaukee side. All these guys are just such low point per minute producers, except for Olynyk. Now, the problem is that if the game goes according to plan, Olynyk probably plays about 15 minutes, and that still isn't what you're looking for DFS. But if anything goes wrong and he's able to get a few more minutes, whether it's Bam foul trouble or Olynyk just shooting well when he comes in and they leave him out there, or just the rotation is different than we expect. If any of these things happen, Olynyk's the kind of guy that if he gets a handful of extra minutes, he can really make your slate for you. Whereas when you talk about all these other value guys, they just need to, 1, get the minutes that you're expecting them to get, and 2, have one of the most productive games they've had all season.
Of course, this is NBA Live Before Lock. We'll be here until 6:30 p.m. each time. Then we're going to turn things over for MLB Live Before Lock, as Lawfully and Terry are going to take you up leading up to the start of tonight's MLB action. Of course, we are presented by SuperDraft. Be sure to go over to superdraft.io and download that app to play in all these contests on SuperDraft. And of course, if you use the promo code Awesemo10, it's $10 free on your first deposit, $10 more, $20 free on your first deposit of $100 or more. So be sure to go over to superdraft.io. They are the sponsor of this show. Of course, be sure to smash that like button right here on YouTube. We are here for the next 50-ish minutes or so to answer your questions about these games. I thought another topic that you guys talked a little bit about earlier today is looking at the 2 high price options. of Giannis and Harden being much more on Giannis, mentioning about, obviously with Westbrook back for the Rockets, which, as I was building lineups, I'm like, man, should I have some lines with Russell Westbrook? I just don't know if I trust him yet because of coming back from injury.
Yeah, obviously the big concern there is the minutes for Westbrook. They had said that he was going to be limited to around 20, I think it was 28 to 32 minutes last game. And because of the blowout, he only played about 23 and a half minutes. One thing that I thought was interesting, and I don't want to read too much into it, but it makes me a little bit hesitant to really bump his minutes too high, is that a lot of times what you'll see happen in a game like that where someone's on a minutes restriction and the game blows out is that they'll still come back in and get their final run in the fourth quarter to get them basically to their minutes limit so that they can extend it easier in the next game. That didn't happen with Westbrook. They still didn't bring him back in. He played, like I said, 23 and a half minutes. So I think that it's tough to be really comfortable saying, okay, now Westbrook comes out and plays his normal, 36 or 37, and he's good to go for an extra 12 minutes. Like I didn't, going into the game last time, I didn't think he was going to be on a minutes restriction, or at least one as restrictive as the one that he was. So I'm definitely concerned about going much higher. I have him in at like 33 minutes right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if he plays a little bit less. I would be relatively surprised if he plays a lot more. And the salary is just expensive enough where, you obviously there's some appeal to getting to a relatively low on Westbrook in tournaments on a 2-game slate. But the point Josh made this morning, and I agree with him, is that once you get to like the $9,700 salary on Westbrook, you're already rostering some pretty questionable value guys. So the inclination is going to be to just go with it and get to Giannis or get to Harden for not that much more at that point. So I think it's going to be tough to get him in lineups.
Yeah, it's like you guys were talking about because someone asked about putting Harden and Giannis in the same lineup, and it's like you're just not going to like. I mean, like I would rather team up a Jimmy Butler and a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander together than take a Giannis and maybe someone in that low 7-ish range.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like when I did my optimal lineup before the show, it got to Giannis, but it got to a lot of guys that you look and it's just like, man, if they score 20 points, I'll be happy. And their floor is non-existent. And that's with just Giannis in the lineup. So like getting to both of them, I think is going to be obviously not impossible, but leave you with some really, really ugly lineups. So yeah, I mean, I think the big question is just, are you getting to one, or are you going more balanced? And that's something that in tournaments, I think the answer is probably different than in cash games, because in cash games, you're taking that floor that Giannis gives you and you're settling for the medium projection from guys like Iguodala. In tournaments, especially, and it's really ownership dependent in cases like this, but as of the last time I checked our ownership projection, we had a ton of ownership going to Giannis, a ton of ownership going to Iggy. And if the whole field is going to take that approach where they're going stars and scrubs, even though the scrubs really aren't there, I think in tournaments, just being contrarian by rostering more mid-range guys in this case and hoping that Giannis does basically just hit his medium projection and doesn't exceed it, gives you a pretty decent path. Like you're basically, if you're doing that, you're basically hoping for a lower scoring slate, because if the slate's high scoring, it probably means that Giannis had a monster game or Harden had a monster game and a couple of the value plays really exceeded expectations. But if you can get this slate to kind of just stay in, like on DraftKings, like the 320, 330 range, you're going to be in really good shape if a large percentage of the field goes stars and scrubs.
Yeah, I mean, looking at ownership, Giannis's, we have him at 44% on DK. I mean, outside, I mean, you look, obviously Iguodala's up there. When you look at cheap values, I guess then you have to kind of go down to, Jay Crowder at 4,500. You got to go down a little bit before you even get to him.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess one other distinction worth making is that to some extent, you could argue that it depends on. This is a spot that I think kind of depends on how many lineups you're playing. Like if a large percentage of the field is going stars and scrubs, like we're projecting right now, and you're someone that plays, 5-10 lineups in these large field tournaments, I think that you should be more inclined to go balanced and be contrarian from the field that way. If you're someone that plays 150 lineups, I still think you can go balanced, but you at least can make a stronger argument for basically saying, I'm going to just take this stars and scrubs build and I'm going to rotate through all these cheap guys. And if one or two of them go off, I know I'll have exposure to them. So I think this is an instance where going stars and scrubs, you're going to have an advantage if you're playing the maximum number of lineups.
By the way, do got to let you know if you go to Awesemo.com right now, today's free premium content is NBA ranking. So definitely want to check out some of the free content we have over there at Awesemo.com. Of course, we are going to answer questions at YouTube, also on Slack. If you're in Slack, best way is always say is mention me on Slack. Great way for me to be able to see that. And that's what our first question was saying he's got a lot of Adams and Noel in their same lineup.
I wouldn't do that. I'm not really high on Noel anyway, but basically the path for Noel to have a big game is for Adams to be limited for whatever reason, whether it's foul trouble or Noel just playing well or something. But for Adams to lose minutes, then you also have to deal with Noel needs to get those minutes. I personally think that if Adams were to get in foul trouble or something, Bazley picks those minutes up more so than Noel in this particular matchup. But I wouldn't be playing them together outside of maybe FanDuel, and that's just because Power Forward is so bad on FanDuel.
You know, we were mentioning right before we took the air about the Bledsoe entry. I know, we may not be as concerned about that, but for the people that are concerned about what happens if or if not Bledsoe plays.
If he's out, then I would expect one of George Hill or DiVincenzo to start. I think that you probably get around 26 minutes for George Hill. I think that if DiVincenzo is coming off the bench, you probably get around 22 to hit for him. He's been behind Pat Connaughton in the rotation, so I think that you would probably see it come out something like 24 minutes for Connaughton, 22 for DiVincenzo. If DiVincenzo starts, I would go ahead and bump him up to around 26. I'd have Hill in like the 24 to 26 minute range, and I would keep Connaughton down around 20. And then obviously if Bledsoe's out too, you're getting a little bit more usage for Giannis, but also for Chris Middleton.
You know, I mentioned about Jay Crowder, and obviously people are going to look at that salary. You know, as you look at what is ceiling in terms of how you're building your lineups with the 150 roster construction, how much is Jay Crowder coming up for you?
Yeah, I haven't crunched yet. I'm working on that now, but I do think he'll end up being one of the value plays that I get to a pretty good amount because he's 4,500 on DraftKings, which is, not overly expensive. The concern that I have is, obviously this is a different series. We don't know exactly how Spoelstra's rotations are going to look, but in the series against Indiana, you had Crowder losing minutes to Iguodala. Maybe, it is a different matchup here. Maybe they have Crowder out there closer to 30 minutes, but I think there's at least some concerns there, but I feel better about someone like Crowder's upside than a lot of the other value on the slate.
Frank asked about whether you would play Bam and Olynyk together in the same lineup.
Normally my answer would be no, because the easiest path for Olynyk to get more minutes is for something to happen to Bam. With it being a 2-game slate, I think you could decide to just set a rule not to have more than two of, say, Crowder, Bam, and Olynyk, because there's at least a path where Olynyk is playing minutes, alongside Bam. That's not the most likely scenario, but you kind of want to be careful on these really short slates. You don't want to just completely restrict yourself from getting to certain lineups. If I'm playing like one lineup, I probably wouldn't choose one that has Bam and Olynyk. But if I'm playing 150 and like 4 of those lineups or something have Bam and Olynyk alongside each other, I'd be okay with it.
We're seeing obviously a lot of ownership for Covington for the Rockets. As you see that high ownership, is it becoming someone that you say, you know what, I might fade him a little bit?
On Covington?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a spot where I'm paying close attention to the ownership because he's obviously coming off of a monster game last time, but prior to that, he's been really disappointing this series. And the thing that's really stood out is that you haven't seen him really playing like 37, 38 minutes. Like I thought coming into the playoffs was a strong possibility. You're seeing Jeff Green play really big minutes. Even in that last game that obviously blew out, Green and Covington both played about 30 minutes. I think that the minutes distribution between all of these front court guys and the wings on Houston is going to be pretty close. And so I don't think there should be drastic ownership differences between any of them, especially when you do compare him to Jeff Green, who can knock down threes, he can defend, he can rebound, he can pick up some assists. Like they have similar skill sets, they have similar fantasy production. I think you should be wary of just piling on the Robert Covington because he happened to make a bunch of threes last game. Like obviously that has no impact on this game.
As I look over at SuperDraft, of course, they are a sponsor of this program. Of course, you got to go over to superdraft.io or download the app in your app store. And looking at the guard position, Goran Dragic at 1.6 times on SuperDraft sticks out to me.
Yeah, me too. I think it's a really good multiplier there.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the other multipliers. I mean, you look at the guard combination with the Thunder. Is who's going to be the guy that is going to stick out above? I mean, obviously we mentioned about Gilgeous-Alexander, but when you look at the Chris Paul and Schruter combination, is there one you prefer over the other?
I like Gilgeous-Alexander the most just because I think he plays the most minutes. But the usage has been down for him a bit in this series, whereas it's been up for Chris Paul, which I think makes sense when you consider Gilgeous-Alexander being the young player and Paul being the more experienced veteran. So I think that the ceiling, actually I don't even want to say that, the ceiling is really high for both. But I do prefer Gilgeous-Alexander. I think the price point there is just really favorable. Obviously he's coming off of an awful game his last time out, but you don't really want to take anything away from that. He's still, assuming this game's close, should play 40 plus minutes. Paul, I think, would be the second guy out of that backcourt because, like I said, the usage is up for him. I expect him to play 36, 37 minutes if this game's close. And then Schruter, more of a tournament option for me, just because I think his salary is the least appealing out of the three guards. Not that it's too expensive. It's just not as favorable, I don't think, as Paul and as Gilgeous-Alexander. And I think Schruter also plays fewer minutes than either of them.
Nate over in Slack had mentioned about thoughts on playing Shea and Gallo in the same DK cash lineup. I will tell you this, Gallinari, we have as the highest owned on DraftKings today.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Like, he's another one of those guys that the median projection is going to be pretty solid for him, but I think it's a spot that you can get away from in tournaments. But as far as the question for Gilgeous-Alexander and Gallo and Cash, I think it's perfectly fine. Like, they're not taking minutes away from each other. If the game's competitive, you should get low to mid 30s minutes from Gallo. You should get, like I said, 40 or more from Gilgeous-Alexander. So I think they're both fine in cash. And they're both fine in tournaments too. Just as far as Gallinari's ownership goes, he's someone that we talk about a lot. He just doesn't really have that extra gear where he has that volatility that gives you a really high ceiling. It's so whenever he's someone that when he's popular in tournaments, I'm normally not that scared to get away from him and go to some other guys. And then when he's low owned, I like him because he typically gives you pretty good games. Like, he's a mid-20s usage guy, gets some boards, he's getting some minutes at the 5. So if you were lower owned, I'd be interested in tournaments. But at his high ownership, I think I'll be pivoting to some other plays.
I know this is a topic that you guys talked about earlier today, but the power forward spot on FanDuel today, and when people who look at our ownership, they're going to notice that we got some high ownership on FanDuel with Bam and Covington. I mean, is it like how are you on FanDuel figuring out what you do at power forward? Because I mean, I wouldn't say anyone's wrong if you had 100% Bam.
Yeah, it's Josh and I talked about it this morning. Like, typically on FanDuel in these situations for me, I end up just going overweight on the guys that I think give me the best lineup. I think Bam in particular is the clear one there. He's 8K. It's not an excessive price point, and he's going to just grade out the best out of that group. Where I do think it's interesting is you have Covington and you have Green. I don't think that the ownership should be much different between them. So if Green is coming in with lower ownership, I would prioritize him just because of the ownership. But my game plan would pretty much be to just get to Bam and then be rotating between Covington, Green, and to some extent Nerlens Noel, just because that's like literally the only other body there.
Yeah, Green ownership is drastically different than Robert Covington. Drastically different. If you're looking there, I mean, yeah, we've got our top 4 over 60% ownership on FanDuel just overall. I mean, you look at some of obviously we'll see what happens with Eric Bledsoe. He was one of the more higher owned players that we had over on FanDuel. Brooke Lopez is someone we haven't talked about a lot. I obviously, being a Magic fan, I watched pretty much every moment of that series. It was a bad matchup for Brooke Lopez going up against Vooch in the opening round. But I know when I was doing crunches this morning, Brooke Lopez was coming up a lot for me.
I think the price tag is really affordable for him. This is, again, it's a slate where you're just not really going to feel great about a lot of the value, but getting Lopez at a low 5K price tag, it's not like center is a great position either because, Adams has legitimate question marks. Houston doesn't do centers. Bam is there, and then you have Lopez. So it's not like it's a slate where you have Vooch and Jokic or something like that. So yeah, I think Lopez looks good. If this game's competitive, I expect 33, 34 minutes from him. You potentially, depending on how Miami game plans against Giannis, you could see Lopez getting some more open looks as well. It helps that, he's not someone that has to be around the rim. So if Miami is packing the paint and looking to keep Giannis away from the basket, you potentially could have Lopez stepping out to knock down some threes. He played 3 games against Miami this year for whatever it's worth and was solid in all of them. 35 minutes, 28 minutes, and 32 minutes. 24, 33, and 30 DraftKings points. Obviously not reading too much into that, but it's not, at least with centers, I do like to take a look and just make sure that nothing, really weird consistently happened, and it didn't in this case.
Over on Slack, Robert Ross asks, he goes, would it be okay when playing cash lineups on FanDuel to skip Harden and Giannis and try to play an all mid-tier players and avoid the scrubs?
I wouldn't, especially in cash. And especially on FanDuel, because you have to roster the 2 small forwards there. So I think Giannis becomes really important. Harden, you could get away from easier because the shooting guard position is just better for one. You have at shooting guard on FanDuel, I'm pulling it up now to double check, but I think you have Gilgeous-Alexander. You have
at shooting guard, you said?
Yeah, shooting guard. You have Butler, Middleton.
You got Shea Gilgeous, Middleton, Schruter, Hero, Robinson, Iguodala, Connaughton. Yeah,
it's a lot deeper position. So getting away from Harden and saving some money there, I think is easier to do. Plus, the scoring on FanDuel doesn't set up as favorably for Harden because you lose the full point for turnovers and you don't get a bonus for 3-pointers. Whereas the scoring for Giannis is actually more favorable on FanDuel, or at least as favorable. You don't get the double-double, triple-double bonuses, but blocks and steals are worth more. So, I think sacrificing Giannis's floor is really difficult to do, especially in cash games, because there's just not those small forward options that give you any sort of floor, really. You have Gallinari, but beyond that, you're just talking about guys that can easily give you 20 points in any given game. So I definitely would be taking the Giannis points. If you can't get up to Harden, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the first couple of games of the Magic series for Chris Middleton, it was not a good start to the series. Ended the series well in the last 3 games, and I think it's an interesting point to bring up of, what happens if you get a 40, DFS night for Chris Middleton? Could that bring Giannis's numbers down a little bit?
Yeah, I think obviously they both can just have good games. Miami's a good enough team where they should be able to hang with 2 guys from Milwaukee having good games. It's not the same as Orlando, where basically every time Middleton had a big game, you saw the score just blow open and blowouts were a problem. But so I'm not worried about playing them together. But I do think that if you're kind of just looking at this and we talk a lot about within a lineup trying to give yourself like a clear path to how you get place. I think that if you're looking and you're going more balanced and you're thinking like, okay, how does Giannis not have a monster game? The most logical answer is that Middleton has an exceptional game and that Giannis is merely good. You're not even trying. If you're fading Giannis, you're not even trying to say like, oh, what if Giannis only gets 40? Like, you're accepting he's going to get 55 or 60. It's just a matter of how does he not get to 70 or 75? And the clearest answer there is that Middleton takes on a bigger role. Miami, does something game plan wise to try and slow Giannis down, whether it's just, trying to keep him from getting the ball, whether it's packing the paint and making him shoot. Whatever they do, you're hoping that they do something that kind of lowers Giannis's usage and forces Middleton to do the heavy lifting. And that would be like the most logical narrative for kind of how to leverage against Giannis within a lineup. And so I do like that idea in tournaments if you're going more balanced of going to Middleton for that reason.
Nate with another question in Slack. Last man on DraftKings, George Hill or PJ Tucker?
So if Bledsoe's out, obviously it's going to be Hill. If Bledsoe's in, I have Hill at about 18 DraftKings points. I have Tucker at about 20 DraftKings points. So I would lean Tucker, not with much enthusiasm.
And this year, thing about Bledsoe is, what if he plays and all of a sudden, his first rotation, first couple minutes in the game, he tweaks the injury?
Yeah, that's entirely possible.
I think that's always something, and I know some people in chat were kind of talking about that, and that could drastically change the ownership, obviously, of Hill in this one. Let's see here. Some people saying Chris Paul is due for a big game.
I mean, the opportunity will be there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things of like, I'm a big CP3 guy. I always have been. And look, I think the salary's there. Someone had asked about CP3 or Gordon on SuperDraft. Let me pull up what.
Yeah, I mean, unless the difference is massive at CP3.
Yeah, CP3 1.4 times on SuperDraft.
That's a really, really good value.
Yeah, I mean, look, he could have a great game. I mean, look, if you think George Hill's going to have a great game, 1.9 times on SuperDraft, I think that's something that you have to look at as well. Of course, we are here for another 30 minutes or so. Then it is MLB Live Before Lock, as they will take you up until game time, first pitch for MLB tonight at 7 p.m. I think this is a question we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, but for someone who's just coming in here, of Jeff Green and Robert Covington.
It's really, really ownership dependent for me, because they, for all intents and purposes, are the same guy. Like, you're not going to, you can play this game 100 times. And if someone says, you have to predict who does better between Robert Covington and Jeff Green, you're just not going to get that correct much more than like 50% of the time, because there's kind of a hot hand element where if one of them's playing really well, they'll probably get a couple minutes more than the other one. Most likely only one of them is going to be in the closing lineup, because you assume that all of Tucker, Gordon, Harden, and Westbrook are going to close. So there's a hot hand element there where whoever shot is falling might get a couple extra minutes. Also, whoever, they're similar in the rebounding department. So, and that's one thing that actually has stood out from this series is, for a lot of basically since Covington joined the Rockets, his rebounding numbers were through the roof, and that was driving up his value a lot. That really hasn't been there in this series. It's been a huge drop off. So that's something that you're not really looking to, saying Covington has a huge edge there. And so it really, in situations like that where guys are similarly priced and have the same range of outcomes and a similar projection, you're just looking at ownership. And that's a spot where you can lead on ownership really heavily. And basically in tournaments, you are going... Basically in tournaments, if you play this 100 times, you're going to make more money between those two by just saying, I'll take the lower owned one every single time, than by saying, I think this is a Jeff Green game, or I think this is a Robert Covington game, because you don't know.
A player that's being brought up in the chat, seen by a couple of different people, is Kendrick Nunn. I just can't trust that he's going to play enough.
I have him at 0 minutes. He played last game because Jimmy Butler was hurt in the first half. If you look at the rotation for Miami, pulling it back up now and make sure I have the right game. So in the first half, Kendrick Nunn subbed in with 7 minutes and 34 seconds left in the second quarter. So everyone played before Kendrick Nunn. He wasn't really in the rotation. Butler missed the entire second quarter with his shoulder injury. Then in the second half, Nunn started the fourth quarter. It was it wasn't a blowout, but Nunn played about 6.5 minutes in the fourth quarter. You had Derek Jones Jr. not play at all in the second half. So, potentially Nunn plays something like 12 minutes or 10 minutes or something, and Derek Jones Jr. doesn't play at all. Obviously, if you're expecting 10 minutes, you're not going to roster Nunn anyway. I think that it's entirely possible, though, that he just goes back to being a DNP.
We got, let me get the right person. Marcus, he asked if you see Bazley seeing more than 15 minutes.
I have him at 19. I think, last game he got, 25, but that was due to the blowout and playing the entire fourth quarter. In the prior game where it was competitive, Bazley played, I think it was 19 minutes. He played 18.7 minutes in the game that Oklahoma City won by 3. I do think that you get similar run again, because I do have concerns about Steven Adams closing this game. We talked about that before. I think that they close small because they do want Lou Dort out there. But you've also kind of seen Nerlens Noel not playing a ton of minutes. So I think that you probably get a couple extra minutes for Bazley and then a couple less for Noel. So I have him in at 19, which puts him in the category of, if you're playing a bunch of lineups and you're rotating through value guys, you should be getting to some Bazley. But that's not an endorsement saying, I think Bazley is the key to the slate or anything like that, because it's just like everyone else in the value range. You're basically just throwing darts and saying, I hope one or two of these guys have a game well above expectations, but there's no one or two guys that seem particularly likely to do so.
By the way, we should mention we do have a ownership update. So for our premium members, you go over to awesemo.com. You can see that ownership update. Definitely some things that stuck out to me. Gallinari's ownership going down notably is something to pay attention to there. Iron Maiden over in Slack goes, thoughts on Hero? He's a bit pricey, but we know the Bucks give up a ton of threes.
Yeah, that's an interesting spot, and Josh and I kind of touched on it this morning. I'm interested to see how this game goes because the Bucks do give up a lot of threes, but the Bucks are also a team that they tend to give up threes to who they want to give up threes to. And there's one really big difference here between the Heat and the Magic as far as kind of what I'm expecting there. In the Orlando series, you saw them basically just shadowing Evan Fournier and doing everything they could to keep Fournier off the 3-point line. I think the logical step would be that they're going to do that with Jimmy Butler. And I do expect them, obviously, to pay a lot of attention to Butler defensively, but they don't care if Butler shoots threes. The guy's like a 25% 3-point shooter. So they're not going, they might be trying to keep the ball out of Butler's hands entirely. Like that's one thing, but they're not going to be saying like, hey, let's get Butler to kick it out to a wide open Tyler Hero so he can take these threes, because that's not a good outcome for the Bucks. So, the fact that they do just allow threes does play to Tyler Hero's strengths, but I don't think you're going to be seeing Tyler Hero get the same treatment as all the guys on Orlando not named Evan Fournier were, because they didn't care if Markelle Fultz is shooting threes. They don't care if Gary Clark is shooting threes. They're not likely to just say like, yeah, okay, Tyler Hero, take wide open threes. Duncan Robinson, take wide open threes. I don't think that will be the game plan. So I do think he'll get good looks, because again, slowing Butler down will be a priority, but the salary is a little bit more expensive than I would like. So it's hard for me to get there unless, I'm just playing 150 lineups. Trust
me, as a Magic fan, in a way, it was comical watching that series because the Bucks had basically just made it say, Evan Fournier, we're not going to let you shoot. Vooch, we know what you're going to get. Someone else beat us.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They didn't have an answer for Vooch. They had an answer for Fournier. And then, if Gary Clark knocks down 6 threes and you lose, then that's a game.
It's like I told Pete the other day. I said, Pete, just put Vooch in your lineup. Don't even question it. Just put him in your lineup. He's going to get you a massive point score. Yes, I know he was priced up, but yeah, it was, it's Magic have the weirdest roster in the league. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, no Jonathan Isaac next year either, no?
Yeah, that's... as a Magic fan, just trade Aaron Gordon, get what you can for him.
Yeah.
Favorable contract, get what you can for him. Hopefully Fournier, opts out of that deal and they can save a little money here. But another question we've got from a couple of different people, and I don't know if you guys talked about it this morning, of could you put together Harden and Westbrook in the same lineup?
I wouldn't want to. I mean, like, it's obviously going to be easier than going Harden and Giannis. But the problem that I think you run into is the easiest way or really the way that has success is something weird happens, like that game goes to overtime or something where Harden and Westbrook both play more minutes than you're assuming, because it's difficult for them both to have a monster game together relative to their salaries. Like, they can both go for 50 or 60, but that's not really making you happy that you allocated that much money there. So you're kind of hoping for like a really weird outcome where they both just play way more minutes in regulation than we expect, or the game goes to overtime or something like that. But if that's the case, like it's a tight game down to the wire, or it goes to overtime, you're going to want the OKC guys too. And you run out of money real quick if you're going Harden, Westbrook, and then trying to get to the OKC backcourt. So I don't think that I would want them together. It's another situation where I'm not setting a rule to only have one, but I also am pretty confident that just by crunching my lineups, I'm not really going to get them together.
Q Zuna asks, he goes, can I play 4 Heat players without a whole game stack?
Yeah, I think it's fine. The Heat are really favorably priced. And there's normally 2 things that I kind of ask myself when I'm trying to figure out if I have to run it back with guys. And obviously you prefer it because there's correlation, and correlation's good. But for me to decide that like I really have to, either the team that I'm rostering the players from has to be is the far superior team. Like last series, I wouldn't want 4 Milwaukee guys and no Magic guys, because if how do all the Orlando guys go off unless there's guys on the Magic exceeding expectations? That's not the case here. Like Miami, obviously not the clearly superior team than Milwaukee, and the same goes for Bucks over the Heat. The other thing is the other team drastically underpriced? Like if I'm rostering 4 Miami guys, obviously I would like this game to be competitive down to the end. Is the other team priced in a way where if we get a competitive 4 quarters, they basically have to be beating their salaries because they're too cheap? That's not really the case with Milwaukee either. You're talking about Giannis over 11K, Middleton's around 8K, Bledsoe's around 6K. It's pretty. You can pretty easily see how multiple guys on Miami can outperform their salaries, and maybe one guy or no guys on Milwaukee are good but not great.
Another question we got in relation to FanDuel is on the center position. So we've got Brooke Lopez at 5,700, Steven Adams 5,500, PJ Tucker 4,200, Kelly Olynyk 4,000. Olynyk is someone that I know was coming up for me a lot. Brooke Lopez was coming up a lot. Really wasn't getting a ton of PJ Tucker.
Yeah, I think Lopez is the most appealing there. To me, it's him or Adams. I haven't projected a little higher than Adams. But yeah, it's, PJ Tucker is pretty ugly. Kelly Olynyk is even uglier. I lean towards mostly getting to Lopez.
Dream Chaser says, could you do a Rocket stack?
The problem I have with doing that is I don't think the pricing is that conducive for it, because to a large extent, they're still kind of overpriced for Westbrook being out. So like Harden, I think, is a little bit overpriced because of Westbrook. Westbrook himself, I think, is a little overpriced given the likely, probability that he's not playing 38 minutes or anything. But then you also, Westbrook being back takes so much usage away from other guys, whether it's Gordon or the wings in the front court. I think that if you get like a really big game from a Covington or a Green or a Tucker, it probably is that either one, they were just knocking down a bunch of threes, but it's unlikely that multiple of those guys are doing it, or two, one of them just got lucky as far as rebounding numbers go. And obviously with rebounds, if Tucker's getting a rebound, Covington's not getting it, et cetera. So there is negative correlation between rebounds. And I think that those guys to have a big game, a lot of it does come down to rebounding. So
I know another player that people have been asking us about that we haven't talked about yet is Dort, 3,700 on FanDuel. Obviously, he's been a guy that's been on Harden a lot in this series. And obviously, I guess the question is how many minutes do you have him playing tonight?
I have Dort in for, I think, 33 or 34. I think plays pretty much as he can without fouling out. They obviously want him on Harden. With Dort, the problem is just, what does he do offensively? And Houston will let him shoot. They would love for Dort to take threes. OKC probably would rather him move the ball around and not take the threes. But his usage has been higher in this series than his season-long numbers, and that's a result of him just getting wide open looks. Obviously, in any one game, he can just shoot above his average and pay off his salary pretty quickly, getting those opportunities. So I do think the opportunities are there for him. The problem is just that, again, with how value-starved this slate is, right now you have about 20% ownership going to him on DraftKings. I do think that that's fine. I don't think he's over-owned. It's just, it's someone that his floor is non-existent. He can very easily, he averages around 0.6 fantasy points per minute. He can really easily just go out there and play 32 minutes and get you like 13 fantasy points. And so it's not like he has any sort of floor, but he's, as far as value plays on this slate go, I think he's one of the better ones.
Is he a better value play than Bazley?
I think so, just because of the minutes. Bazley's also not a high per minute producer, despite what he did in the bubble in a few games. Mm-hmm. He, shot the lights out, but typically, like for his season-long numbers, he's not really a high producer. And in a playoff game, you're not going to have Chris Paul or Gilgeous-Alexander or Dennis Schruter deferring to Darius Bazley. So he's another one that he's a better producer than Dort on a per minute basis. But if you're expecting around 20 minutes from Bazley and 34 minutes from Dort, they're close enough that Dort should project quite a bit higher than Bazley.
When I see these questions come in about New Orleans, Noel, I can't trust him. Every time, and there's been times, this bubble where his ownership's been just really high, and I'm just like, I can't do it.
Yeah, it's to me, it's just not really the spot that you want to go there, because normally Noel's someone that I can get on board with because he does produce at a high rate, and kind of like we were talking about with Kelly Olynyk, if all you need when you roster someone that's cheap and produces at a high per minute clip, you just need like one thing to break your way. You just need to get lucky with, the guy ahead of him getting in foul trouble or, whatever. There's a million different things that can happen in the course of a basketball game. But the problem is that I'm not convinced that if one of those things does happen, that Noel gets a bunch more minutes here. Like if Steven Adams were to get in foul trouble, you might get an extra couple minutes for Noel, but I think you just get more run for the wings from OKC because of this matchup. I think that you would get more Baisley. I think that, maybe Terrence Ferguson picks up a few more minutes. It's just not a matchup where I think that OKC is going to go out of their way to play their centers. So, again, on FanDuel with power forward being what it is, Noel makes some sense. On DraftKings, if you're playing a ton of lineups, mix him in by all means, just because he's not any worse than most of these other guys. But it's just not a spot that I'm happy that I'm looking to get to.
Strickstein71 over on Slack asked about your thoughts for Dennis Schruter on DraftKings.
I think he's my least favorite out of the 3 guards in the backcourt for OKC. I think his salary is just not quite as appealing as the rest of them. He probably plays he almost definitely plays fewer minutes than Paul and Gilgeous-Alexander, but I think that he probably should also have lower ownership. I'm double checking right now, but on DraftKings, 23% ownership on Schruter, 37 on Gilgeous-Alexander, and 33 on Paul. So you do get a little bit of an ownership discount. He does still have a high ceiling. I just don't think he's quite as good as the other two. I did use my normal rule of just making sure I don't have more than 2 of the Paul, Gilgeous-Alexander, and Schruter groups.
Hoodmaster asked us for who is the best sub 4K player on DraftKings GPP, not named Andre. So just kind of, I'll go down the list here. You have Kelly Olynyk, who is at 3,900. Then it's Baisley, 38, Covington, 38, Matthews, 37, Rivers, 36, of course, Iguodala, 35, Mason third, 35, DiVincenzo, 34, Noel, 33, Marvin Williams, I know who y'all talked a little bit about this morning at 3,300. As you think of that list, who is the one that sticks out to you? I mean, no, it's not necessarily a list we want to go to, but someone stick out to you?
Yeah, I mean, factoring in ownership, I just finished at least a preliminary crunch for DraftKings. Factoring in ownership, outside of Iguodala, I'd have the most of Marvin Williams. It's not because I like Marvin Williams. It's because he's 10% owned and probably plays around 20 minutes. It's more of just all these guys suck. I'll play the ones that nobody else wants to play. It doesn't have anything to do with actually liking Marvin Williams.
Yeah, I know we're getting a lot of questions about the status of Bledsoe. Haven't seen anything official from the Bucks yet of whether or not he is going to be in there. Mark, appreciate you in the super chat. Dragic or Schroeder, DraftKings GPP?
I definitely have Dragic projected higher. Let me see if ownership did anything. I have a lot more Dragic than Schroeder.
Yeah, I mean, Dragic's, pretty highly owned. I mean, look, I'm like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm all team Jimmy Butler in this one. And I hope that does not come back to bite me. But like I look at that price point and I still say, I think you look at him and KGA teaming them together, I feel like you can put together a pretty good lineup. Yeah,
I just started sorting my lineups kind of based on projection and ownership and stuff, and to figure out which ones I like the best. And I did start getting balanced lineups rising to the top, which, as I said, I kind of expected, but I'm glad to see that being the case. And I agree. It's just the mid-range on this slate has a ton of upside, and the value is really, really questionable.
Yeah, even I look on FanDuel, I mean, Chris Middleton is 6,800.
Right. He can still go out there and get you 45, 50 points. It's not like the ceiling is limited.
Middleton and Giannis in the same FanDuel lineup viable?
Yeah, it's perfectly fine.
Ben says Crowder or Gordon. I know Westbrook takes away his looks, but he's been getting 28 to 30 points. Crowder most likely closes.
Crowder or Gordon? I would say Crowder because he's cheaper. I'm not completely convinced Crowder closes. He wasn't closing last series. Again, that could change here. But either way, Gordon's more expensive and essentially useless when Westbrook and Harden are both healthy.
So there is, I know someone put this in a premium Slack account. Looks like Bledsoe is inactive. The tweet was Eric Bledsoe is on Milwaukee's inactive list for game 1.
Is there a source?
It's a guy he works for Hoops Hype, Alberto De Roa. And then Josh just put one Slack from Matt Velasquez.
Yeah, he's out.
Yeah. So here goes your George Hill ownership to skyrocket.
Yep. Time to redo those projections.
But I mean, I guess that's the question. Outside George Hill, who do you pivot to in that guard rotation?
DiVincenzo should go from like 10 minutes to probably like 22 as well.
Yeah. That's something that. So I'm looking. So this was on FanDuel. We had George Hill at 22% prior to this news. I expect that to skyrocket.
Yeah, it definitely should, because now you actually have value. So it changes the entire slate.
Of course, when you're looking to get our ownership projections, you got to sign up for an Awesemo Plus NBA Weekly Pass for $16.95. This gives you access to our player projections, ownership projections, the boom bust tool, and so much more. Get your pass today by signing up at awesemo.com/join. Also, you got to check out our sponsor, SuperDraft. No limits, more winning. You got to download the app in the App Store. And if you use the promo code Awesemo10, you get $10 free on your first deposit and $20 total free on your first deposit of $100 or more. As they've got lineups for MLB, MMA, PGA, NASCAR, NBA, and so much more. So you got to go over and play over there at superdraft.com. Get some other questions here. Some of the latest questions in the chat. Is Korver viable?
I don't think so, no. Giannis gets a bump without Bledsoe too. His assist percentage skyrockets over the last couple of years in games that he's played with Middleton without Bledsoe.
Yeah, someone actually just mentioned, I was about to bring that up, of kind of how that affects where you see Giannis's ceiling tonight going.
It increases and it makes it a lot easier to get to Giannis because now you have the value coming from Milwaukee.
Do you like SGA more than you like Middleton?
I think they're close. I think now I'd give the edge to Middleton because the usage goes up a little bit and the assist opportunities go up as well. I expect that you'll see most, if not all, but most of their minutes staggered between Giannis and Middleton. So he should really be in a position to take over more.
Someone asked about your thoughts about the Bucks guards on FanDuel.
I don't have the pricing in front of me off the top of my head.
I'll pull that up for you. In terms of, let's see here, you've got Middleton at 6,800. Then you have Connaughton 4,100, DiVincenzo 3,900, Matthews 3,900, Korver 3,700.
They're all underpriced except for Matthews. Doesn't really change.
Okay. By the way, if you got any questions, hit those up here in Slack or YouTube. Mikhail says, does Hill now get 30 minutes?
I have him at 28.
Mm-hmm. I feel like not a lot of people are talking about Goran Dragic, even though we've got pretty good ownership on him.
I thought he was one of the best plays on the slate. I still think he's a really good play, but it does change a bit now that you have a ton of value at the guard position. Like a lot of that ownership that was going to value forwards with Iguodala and guys like that, now it's going to go to the guard, which is going to naturally drop how appealing Dragic is.
Yeah. Duncan Robinson's a name we really haven't talked about here. We got him close to 20% ownership.
It's a good matchup from the three-point shooting perspective. Like he's a knockdown three-point shooter. It's really all he does. And we know the Bucks give them up, but I just have concerns over his minutes. Again, we don't know exactly how this rotation is going to look, but in their prior playoff series, he wasn't getting closing minutes. You were getting Tyler Hero playing over him. And his salary isn't really that cheap either. So I'm not really that interested, especially again, now that you're getting a lot more value.
As I mentioned, we'll be here for about another nine minutes or so. And it is MLB live before lock, as Floyd and Terry are going to take you up leading up to tonight's MLB slate. Of course, first NBA game starts here in 9 minutes from now. So you got to start doing those final crunches, get your lineups in before we do hit lock. Crowder or Gallinari?
Just totally different price points. So, obviously Gallinari if you can afford it.
With obviously the changes with Milwaukee with Bledsoe, do you value Connaughton a little bit more than Dort at this point?
Yeah, I think that they're still pretty close. I still think they're pretty close. Like, I still think you get a lot more minutes from Dort.
Someone had asked about, could Miami be playing Olynyk and Bam simultaneously?
They could. I don't think it's the most likely outcome.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing also with it, game one of the series is
right.
to really kind of see, how is Eric Spoelstra how's he going to run the matchups? How's he going to try, slow down this Bucks offense of Giannis running?
Right, exactly. And that's kind of what we were talking about with Olynyk before, which again, you don't need the Olynyk value nearly as much anymore as when we first talked about it. But when you talk about guys that can produce at the high per minute rate that Olynyk does, the ways for you to get there by rostering him are, for something to happen to the Bam, but also to just be wrong about Spoelstra's rotation. Like, I don't think that Olynyk plays minutes alongside Bam. It certainly wouldn't be the first time that Spoelstra's done something I didn't expect, though.
Someone had asked about why is everyone so high on Gallinari tonight?
I think it's just, I'm not that high on him. It's just that the forward position isn't that great.
Yeah, that's definitely, especially especially like a FanDuel at power forward position. Is there do you have a favorite value other than George Hill at this point?
DiVincenzo is fine too, assuming that he'll get the backup point guard run. There's some risk there because you could just get more Connaughton, but I don't think that'll be the case.
Nate says Butler, Covington, Iggy, or Middleton, Gallo, DiVincenzo, DK, Cash. I would probably go the latter with Middleton and Gallo. And
yeah, I would get Hill in there somewhere too if you don't already have him.
I'm just not big on Iguodala. I'm just not. I mean, obviously it brings a ton from a real basketball perspective to what they do. But yeah, in terms of DFS, I'm not a big one. Iron Maiden says, what's the max number of bucks? I'm getting 5, he says.
I have it capped at 5. I'm still working on the lineups, but I'm guessing that I'll get like 4 in most lineups.
The Rook asks, House or Crowder, FanDuel, GPP? I go Crowder.
Yeah, assuming ownership is about the same, I'd go Crowder. Back to the question about game stacking, the Miami game. It probably goes without saying, but completely different math now. If you have 4 Miami guys, you probably want the Milwaukee guys too, because Milwaukee now is very, very underpriced.
We've kind of talked about who's a pivot for Milwaukee for Bledsoe. We mentioned all the various guys there. DiVincenzo is someone you mentioned. Someone says, do you use all the Rockets Thunder guard matchups?
Do I do what?
I'm guessing the question he's asking is basically, do you put all of the guards in the Rockets Thunder matchup on the same lineup? I'm guessing that's what he's asking about.
I mean, I don't know how you can possibly do that considering how expensive they are.
Yeah. Gordon or Gallo on FanDuel?
In most questions, if the answer involves Gordon, my answer is the other guy.
Of course, don't forget we've got MLB live before lock up here just in a couple of moments as they will get you ready for tonight's MLB action. Of course, that will be right here on the same feed, so you don't got to go to another video. It'll be right here, right after we are done. Of course, be sure to smash that like button. We got 179 likes. We got over 1,700 people in here, so let's smash that like button. Let's try to get that up over 200 before we hit MLB live before lock. Sean says 1,200 too much left over GPP on FanDuel. Like, the way I look at that is like it's all based on, do you like the lineup that you have? Like, I always feel like you don't have to spend all your money.
Like in basketball, you typically, like more so than in other sports, you're going to want to, just because pricing is typically efficient. Today, though, the pricing isn't efficient because you just had a surprise scratch. So you have a ton of value that actually projects well. So I haven't built FanDuel lineups, so I don't know for sure, but I would think that you can make probably a better case today at the very least than normal.
Someone asked about Baisley over under 17 minutes. You said you had him at 19?
I have 19.
Yeah. Olenek or Tucker? I go Olenek just because of the value.
I go Tucker because of the minutes. I don't think you really need much of either one, though.
Billy says on FanDuel, can I get away with Green and Covington? I'm guessing what he means is...
Yeah, power forward's terrible. Go for it.
Yeah, it's Bam's going to be so high owned on FanDuel. It's, if you're not going to play Bam, you're just hoping that, people are going to, just go so high on him in that position. How comfortable would you be in fading Harden and Giannis in a high dollar FanDuel single entry?
I wouldn't at all now that there's value.
Okay.
Assuming he means fading both of them, I wouldn't.
That's the way I take it. I mean, I guess it's, I would be more, I'm more team Giannis than I am team Harden tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, without question.
Another we got was Hill, SGA, or Schroeder and Hero. I would go Hill and SGA over Schroeder and Hero.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm big on SGA in this spot. To me, he's a guy that was a core for when I was building my lineups earlier today, and so that's somebody I would look to. So I got this question a couple times. People asking if we thought Frank Mason's going to make the rotation.
I don't have him in the rotation. If he does, I don't think it matters much. Like DiVincenzo's ahead of him.
Tom, and we'll leave on this one. Tom asked Bam or Butler in DraftKings GPP. I think I have both of them in DraftKings.
Yeah,
several lineups.
Yeah, I have a lot. I'd lean towards Butler slightly. Actually, I'd lean toward Bam now. I think position-wise, he's a little easier to get to with all the guard value.
My only concern about Bam is getting in foul trouble with Giannis coming to the rim, and could he get potentially an early foul trouble? That's my only concern.
Yeah, very legitimate concern for sure.
Of course, coming up next, we've got MLB Live Before Lock. Of course, game's going to tip off here in about a minute or so. So that is going to do it for NBA Live Before Lock. Stay right here on Awesemo.com. Coming up next, you got MLB Live Before Lock with Loughran and Terry. How we feeling?
How's it going?
Ready for November 3rd, Terry?
Can't wait. And then the 3 months after that, I'm sure.
I'm very nervous about that. Regardless of the result. I'm very nervous about that. I'm completely on. We're on a hot mic, aren't we? I'd never listened to a damn thing. What's going on, everybody? I know you can't. Welcome to the Awesemo Live Before Lock Show MLB edition. We don't have a ton of time, but we do have about 35 minutes with a fantastic MLB analyst here, Terry McBride. You know him as T McB. I always thought it was TMCB, but it's not. It's T McB, Terry McBride. I should have known that. Anyway, Terry, we don't have much to get into this, so I'll skip the pleasantries, but first I will ask, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. Doing well. How about you? Things good?
Doing good, man. Doing well, yeah. We got 7 games. I think we got plenty of time to jump into this. Hopefully all of you guys enjoyed the NBA Live Before Lock show, 2-gamer today. Only a few games left, a few slates left before we go to single game and start bringing in a ton of NFL content. So we've got a lot going on here at Awesemo, Terry. But until then, it's time to talk baseball. And yes, don't worry, guys. All these questions rolling in, we will hit on them. We'll definitely take questions. Like I said, 7 games isn't that much, so we're going to try and cover everything instead of going game by game, because I did that this morning with Jake Hari. Let's go ahead and really hit on some of the big spots here. Number one, I've already had a couple of people ask me this. How are you approaching weather? Is there anything standing out to you right now that is concerning to you?
So I really have to say I rely completely on the news god for my weather news, and I have not been on top of what's been going on as far as the weather. So I just go by what he's saying. Weather has not been on my radar this afternoon, so apologies on that question out of the gate. That's what's the big radar concern right now? Last I saw, we were looking at some in Colorado, where I usually tend not to sweat it, and then I know there was one other one I think in the Midwest, but I forget what it was.
Yeah, I've seen some talk about the Philly game, and I'm outside of Philly. We just got a little bit of rain right now. I'm not terribly concerned about it though, and unless we get word that it's going to be an issue, I'm just going to assume we're playing. Another thing too, and maybe I'm wrong to think this, Terry, but there's definitely some thinking that the Phillies, who missed a lot of games due to COVID-19, already have a lot of doubleheaders. Like, this team is not getting, if you thought other teams weren't getting days off, you think about the Phillies and the Marlins and the St. Louis Cardinals and stuff.
Yeah.
My assumption is that they're going to do everything they can to play. So maybe you'll see a delay if something rolls through. But from everything else I've seen, I can't imagine they won't try to make sure to fit this entire game in, or at least get something in for the night.
Yeah, a lot of those teams are in that exact situation. Like you said, they're just running out of calendar in which to fit those games if they have to start rescheduling things, and if it's a team they're not going to necessarily see. So yeah, they definitely, we're probably going to see some teams try and stretch, and if they don't have to worry about fans, things like that, it makes it easier to send the guys into the clubhouse wherever they go for a little bit and then bring them back. We haven't seen a lot of that yet this year, but I think as it comes down to this last stretch month, it's going to be a sprint over these next 30 days or whatever it is. So I think
we've
we're
got
going to see
ownership updated 1 minute ago. Guys putting in the work on the back end, always making our jobs easier here on the show. And we just had the top stack tool updated as well. So if you're crunching, if you're looking at that, if you're a premium member at Awesemo, make sure to get those updates in and get ready to rock. So here's the thing. The high price pitching to me is very interesting. You've got Garrett Cole, you got Shane Bieber, and then Lucas Giolito. Earlier in the day, there was a lot of Garrett Cole was up at the top ownership wise, understandably so. Bieber was up there second, but still like 20% behind Cole. I thought that was pretty wild, and it looks like I was accurate in that the gap has narrowed. What about Lucas Giolito though? He's in kind of no man's land. He's in pitcher purgatory here because Garrett Cole's too cheap. Honestly, with the way Bieber's pitched, he's probably too cheap. And Giolito's coming off consecutive 13 strikeout games, one of them being a no-hitter, 1 walk no-hitter. Both of them relatively cupcake matchups, but now you've got him against the Minnesota team that definitely is not a roll over and die type of team, but they do strike out a bit. How do you approach Giolito today? Do you say because of the massive ownership on Cole and on who else? Who's I just talking about? Bieber. That Giolito is someone worth targeting, or is it just not a price range that you can get to?
No, I think it makes sense. Even like you said, it's probably the worst spot of the three, given the lineup that he's going against, that powerful Twins lineup. So I don't love the matchup, but with that ownership share at on my last update, it was around 17, so he's probably hovering around the 20% range on DK. I think that's something you can definitely go to when those other guys are upward of around 50%. You're differentiating your lineup out of the gate, and you're saving money as compared to Bieber. All three of them are very good pitchers. Giolito's earned my trust. Last year, before the year, he added 300 RPMs to his fastball, and that just made all the difference in the world for him, and he's been dynamite ever since. So I don't worry too much about him, even in a tough spot like this. I think we can get to him. He's the third-ranked starter right with those guys on Alex's board. I get a strong projection for him. And I like their offense today, too, to give him some run support and hopefully make it an easier, less stressful, less intense game for him. So I think he could pitch well here. There are some strikeouts in that Twins lineup. It's weird because they have some very heavy strikeout guys and then some guys that do a pretty good job of limiting the strikeout in that lineup. So he's going to have some challenges, but I like the spot for him. And, yeah, with that reduced ownership share, I think it's definitely something you can weaponize on DK.
Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure where you'd come in on that. I think it's a kind of funky spot just because, like, if Giolito was 9,200, he might be the highest owned outside of Garrett Cole today, coming off of those two starts. And I definitely think those two recent performances are good, have his ownership higher. If Giolito was coming off two decent performances, my guess is his ownership would be through the floor today, like not 20% or 19%.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, a guy in that kind of price range that you mentioned there is Max Fried, who's drawing like a similar ownership share to Giolito. And in a vacuum, I think Giolito is probably the better pitcher. I do like Fried a lot, though. Fried with a matchup against Boston, that's potentially a pivot if you don't want to pay the full freight at 10-4 for Giolito. You're getting a similar pitcher, similar kind of a spot, similar kind of ownership share there. Another, tick or two down Alex's board in the top pitchers on my last update, but very, very good pitcher. Also, against a similar type of good offense, but the back end of Boston's offense definitely worse than the back end of Minnesota's. So I think that's a decent pivot there if you need it.
Okay, so with Max Fried, does he have that ceiling as far as strikeouts go to get where we need him?
I think so. Probably not the same overall total ceiling as a Giolito goes, but just jumping over to my thing here, let me see. So far this year, we've got him at 24.8% strikeout. He was 24.6% last year. There's some strikeouts, particularly in like the back middle of this lineup. Dahlbeck is in there now. He's like a 30% strikeout projection guy. We've got Jackie Bradley strikes out a fair amount of the time. Chavis strikes out a fair amount of the time. So not a ton of strikeouts in the higher end hitters, which usually in that kind of a spot, I like to see when the highest end hitters are also the guys that strike out a little bit. And that's not the case here. So it makes the matchup tricky. But I think he's got the enough upside that he can exploit that back end, get a few Ks in the front end, and put together a solid game here.
All right, so we'll get into bats and stacks momentarily, but I want to lock down some pitching here. Garrett Cole and Shane Bieber at the top. You're going to be paying a premium for specifically Bieber, but I don't know if it's that crazy. I mean, he's striking. His strikeout rate is absurd right now. He's striking lefties and righties out north of 40%, 46% to righties, 40.4 to lefties. Swinging strike rate is almost 19%. Called plus swinging strike rate, 37.3 across the board. He's been spectacular. He's allowed a handful of home runs to righties, nothing to lefties, but I'm really not concerned about that because he mitigates any damage with a boatload of Ks. What about Bieber and Cole, who, by the way, Cole's allowed a home run in 7 straight starts, every start this season, and 5 home runs in his last 2. It's not to say I'm concerned about it, but Tampa Bay has won, I think, 18 of their last 21 games, something nuts, Terry. And they're a good offense. They're a well-managed team. They get the right lineups out there, and they put in work. So as much as I would like to get away from Cole because I have some concerns, that price to me is like, it's way too alluring to say, I'm too worried about the home runs or I think Tampa's too good.
Yeah, ultimately that's a spot where I have to and I have those same thoughts in my head, when I'm looking at lineups and everything, but I have to let it's Garrett Cole take over in my brain and eliminate those, right. Those thoughts. Getting a totally solid projection on him. Just got to trust the numbers and roll with it. Typically when he's going to allow some power, it's going to be a solo shot. He's not going to be putting a ton of guys on base. Good to get out of those jams with the strikeouts. So he's not a guy I sweat too much, but I totally agree. The Rays lineup is pretty good top to bottom. They're very well managed, very well run overall organization to do what they do in the AL East with their payroll and everything. So just a really sharp organization. So it's a trickier spot for sure. Bieber's just been lights out, like you were saying. Definitely paying a lot for him on both sides. 12,000 on FanDuel, 11 on DK. But I think he's got the best matchup. It's the weakest offense out of the big three starters that we're talking about here anyway. Love the fact that he's just got a killer out pitch against both hands. The righties can't touch his slider and lefties can't touch his curveball. So just can sit down guys with different stuff to each side of the plate. Really, really sharp pitcher, really strong play. So I have no concerns about doing it. The thing that you have to worry about a little bit, I guess, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of the ownership on the stacks and everything trend more toward the middle teams, is what bats are you able to roll out there with them. So it's a matter of being able to get to those bats. On FanDuel, not as big a concern because everybody's free, but on DK, they make it complicated. And that's why I think we're seeing the Coors Field game in particular go under on DK.
Absolutely. And we've seen the top stack tool change a lot. Sometimes I get things wrong. Sometimes I get things right. The truth is, I'm talking about getting things wrong and right before the games even start. But in terms of predicting what type of movement we're going to see on these tools as the updates come in, and a lot of it's semi-predictable. Like you said, with these expensive pitchers all being jammed into lineups, you're going to see people foregoing those top-priced bats for sure. But there are ways to do it, and maybe we should jump into that. Dakota, by the way, says, I use the Awesemo draft kit for best ball. Love my results for the team. Different but good. Love it, man. I'm glad you grabbed that.
Nice.
Today's the last day to get the 30% off our entire annual NFL product, plus a free fantasy football, best ball, and anything, PPR, standard, you name it, draft kit from us with everything involved, all the projections and tools from Awesemo himself. I put a lot of work into that as well. And we've got straight the schedule, the draft wingman. Check it out. That comes free if you get the NFL annual, which is already 30% off. And then you get $35 free in FFPC credits to go draft teams over there. You're getting like $140 off or something absurd. Today's the last day you can do it. You got a few hours left. I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time, but Dakota reminded me, seriously check that out if you're looking to get into football this year. DFS, and we all play best ball. DraftKings has the Millie Maker for best ball. They got the Wildcat $250K to first, and even the $3 entry, $50K. You're getting your money back on the best ball kit because you're getting $35 in credits at FFPC anyway. So yeah, be sure to dive in on that. It's the best deal we've done in a very long time, and get stoked for football because it's going to be the only thing around. If you think you're not interested, wait till everything is gone in a month and football's the only thing here, and you're slapping yourself across the head because you could have done this. Go to awesemo.com/join, check it out, or go on the homepage. You'll see the link. All right. So top stacks. The one that stands out to me the most, and I think a lot of it came down. So I was earlier in the day, I was waiting to see what we were going to get from Milwaukee as far as pitching goes, because that loomed pretty large as far as my decision went. And we ended up getting Brent Sutter. He is a lefty. I thought it was going to be, was it Eric Lauer? Was it Eric Lauer that was potentially?
That's who I had last night, was Lauer, yeah.
Yeah. So, you did the early bird, so we had no idea. But another lefty. Pittsburgh doesn't strike out a ton against lefties. They're not a good team at all. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, but they have been considerably better against lefties than they have against righties. They have a couple decent bats, and there isn't a single hitter on DraftKings above 3,800. So can we make the argument for going Giolito and also Bieber and getting a Pittsburgh stack in there with 3.7% aggregate ownership? You tell me, Terry.
That's one hell of an argument for doing it if you can make that work with those two pitchers in there. I tell you that.
There's
that would be the only way.
Above 3,800 on the entire team.
Yeah. Just looking down that, I mean, if we're getting to, I would focus in the middle, of course, because nobody's going to be on it anyway, so we don't really need to sweat the individual ownership, and work in then, like a Polanco at 2,900 from the back end. And look to like Kevin Newman at 38, Josh Bell at 36. Josh Bell at 36 is a heck of a deal, actually. Colin Moran, 37. Those are the guys you want to focus in on. I don't know if we're creating enough savings there. We might have to work in a second guy in the 2,000 range to get both those pitchers. But it's one of the teams you'll be able to do that with on the board, I think, on DK. I'm not sure who the other ones are. You've got some savings on the back end of the Brewers, but they're all super owned. So you're getting off of that ownership, which it seems like that's where people who are trying to make that pay up move at pitcher are focused on, the Brewers. So just by making the decision to go to the other side of the game, you're getting wildly different. We know that wildly different is the way to win GPPs.
Yeah. So, it's funny, Terry, usually when you see a team that has a top value percentage of 12.3%, the highest on a slate among 14 teams, they usually have a lot more ownership, especially when they're that cheap. They don't, though.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they are really, really forced down in the ownership, but, sub 5% for a team, as a team, like you said. They're a ways down the top stack tool. They're sitting, 10th overall? But, I mean, I always like to talk about what that percentile or what that percentage there actually looks like. And yeah, it's like half what teams above them are, but it's not a tremendous gap that we're really talking about overcoming from a probability standpoint. If I'm looking at that, none of the teams behind them on that board either are teams you can really go to in this approach. Like the Yankees are going to be lower owned, but they're going to be more expensive, so you can't really do that with them. So I think they make a pretty ideal target for what we're trying to do here.
Hey, hit that thumbs up button if you haven't done so yet. I'm sure Josh, it wasn't Josh, I was going to say, I'm sure Josh peppered you with like requests during the NBA show, but it helps us a ton and we greatly appreciate it. It really helps us continue to put free content out here. So as they say, smash that like, son. All right, so I just came up with a bit of an idea since we only have 18 minutes. I think it'll be much better for our viewers, for the listeners, building lineups right now, so we can kind of encompass everything and kill two birds with one stone. You're not allowed to say that anymore, are you? Right? That's a PETA violation, right? Did you not see that? Oh, okay, never mind. They came out with a whole list of things on, don't say kill two birds with one stone. Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's intense.
Oh, God.
I'm an animal lover. I love animals, man.
Too.
I love them. But that made me laugh. So let's.
Yeah. PETA people are nuts. I love animals too, but those guys are over the top. Let's go.
Yeah. Let's kill two turds with one throne here. I got an idea. Let's talk about the over-owned stacks and the under-owned stacks. When we get to the under-owned stacks, like San Diego, we'll start with them. That's going to lead us straight into that's going to be a perfect segue into the conversation of what cheap pitchers we're willing to roster. Because if we're looking at, say, the San Diego Padres right now, who have the 6th highest aggregate ownership, but the highest top stack probability. And for those of you wondering, we reference this tool because it's important. Top stack probability means what are the percentage chance that they are the best stack on the night, and what is their aggregate ownership as a team. So if the top stack probability is way higher than their ownership, usually there might be something you want to jump onto. Their top stack probability is 19%. Their ownership is 7%. So let's get your take on the Padres, number one, and how we're going to reconfigure pitching if we want to put the Padres into our lineups. Terry, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I think that's a smash spot. Like you said, that's exactly what we want to look for in that stacks tool. It looks so good that I hate writing up Coors games, and I had to write them up in my stack slants, which is the one that's supposed to be looking for the less chalky. So I really like what we can do with this team. Did they announce the final lineup? Do we know who's catching and what that happened with that situation? Just out of curiosity, I had Austin Nola in as the last one.
I do not know.
Minor issue, because they made 2 acquisitions at catcher, so there were question marks about what they were doing. They're loading up for a run this year for sure, this team, and they look really good. We all know Tatis and
confirmation on that.
Okay.
I don't think
we all know Tatis and Machado are killers up top, right? They've just been crushing so far this year, 24 combined home runs, 60 combined RBIs. So gotta love going to those guys. They're really, really expensive. Then they've got Hosmer. Mitch Moreland is another guy they just acquired, who's supposed to be in the middle of this lineup now.
I don't mean to cut you. I think Nola is. I think he is, but
okay.
I'm looking at it, and it. Just go ahead. I'll figure it out. You keep talking. I'll get to it when we're done. Yeah.
It was a minor question, and honestly, his price didn't even pop up for me because he wasn't. I don't know if he's in the pricing on DK anyway. So
that's what happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So question mark in the back end of that lineup. Question mark with the catcher spot. Maybe you get your catcher elsewhere on DK. But like you were saying, there's just a ton of opportunity in this team, so we can make it work paying up for some of those bats. And then you've got, Moreland's going to be 5,000. Maybe you use like a Will Myers instead. I liked Myers, and I like Profar at only 4,200 as a wraparound option from the bottom of this lineup. He does interesting things with his speed. He doesn't strike out that much. not doing anything with the batting average tool. He doesn't have much of a hit tool, but when he hits the ball, he can drive the ball a little bit. So he's an interesting guy that you can build in. Only 1.7% ownership, so you're deferring some ownership from the guys at the top who are, the top 3 hitters up there are going to be owned. So we don't want to only focus in on those guys. We've got to mix in some of the other guys. So I really like what Eric Hosmer does at first base, mixing and matching, very low ownership there, and then maybe a Profar on the other end to save some money and make things work. But I think this is a stack on DK that it makes a ton of sense to try and get to.
Who would your top pitcher be in this spot?
Top pitcher out of these 2 guys at Coors, or top pitcher to use with that stack?
Top pitcher to use with that stack.
So just looking at the top pitchers, I think it's a tough spot, but I think Keller's kind of interesting against the Indians there.
He is.
You're saving a ton of money, right, to work in just as like a salary savings guy. And he's a guy that really does a great job limiting runs, limiting the home run ball. He does a killer job getting ground balls, keeping the ball in the yard. He's actually down this year on ground balls at only 45%, but typically he's in like the low 50s, 51.7 for his career. So he keeps the ball on the ground, keeps it in the park. I really like that Indians offense a lot, but he's the kind of guy that could put up like a 3-run, a game where he yields 3 runs, but doesn't get damaged too badly by now. So I think that's an option there. Not really Hill for me. Maybe Glasnow against the Yankees is kind of sneaky. I thought he'd be sneaky,
I think
but it
that's
actually
sneaky.
looks like he's drawing ownership.
I thought it was real sneaky earlier today, and now his ownership is boomed.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I do understand it because now I mentioned to Jake this morning, I would have preferred Glasnow against the lineup that had Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. That's just my preference because I already know the Yankees have a good, potent juggernaut of an offensive lineup, but they have a lot more strikeouts if you throw those 2 guys in there. And then with Glasnow, he's the type of guy that when you roster him, you're either getting eaten alive and your lineups are dead by 8 o'clock, 7:30 maybe, or he could tear through a Yankees lineup and Stanton and Giancarlo or Stanton and Judge combine for 5 strikeouts, right? Like that, There's no question that is a possibility, but I still think there's some potential here. My only concern is similar to you. Glasnow's ownership at this point, there's just no meat left on that bone if he's going to be 35% owned on DraftKings.
Yeah, it's definitely higher than I expected. And I think, kind of people are leaning into that discount on the 8,400 and kind of thinking along the lines of what we were. There are some strikeouts in that Yankee lineup. Totally agree. Would rather have it with even the 2 thumpers in there just because how much they do strike out. But I think that's why the public's getting there. 9,500 on FanDuel, only 7-ish% ownership on my last update. Kind of an interesting spot on the one pitcher if you want to get away from the bigger ownership. I don't know that you need to do it over there, but I think it's a more interesting spot since there's a lot less of the public going to it.
Where are you at when we moved the conversation to over-owned stacks, at least according to our top stack tool, the Phillies? I'm somebody, that I always, we know how I feel about Philly teams, but I try and stay objective all the time. They've been hitting really, really well lately. Hoskins has come alive. Didi, McCutcheon's finally swinging a really good bat, and hot streaks in baseball, they're real. They're just impossible to quantify. So you never know when they're going to start, never know when they're going to end. So there's not too much time that we need to spend putting into this. But the important thing to me is, and maybe you can touch on this, Eric Fetty, and this is not an exaggeration. I didn't misread this. I even looked it up. It was in my spreadsheet, and I'm like, maybe this is pulling the wrong information. So I went and looked it up in another spot. His strikeout rate, not his swinging strike rate, his strikeout rate is 5.9%. 5.9%. Everything is being put in play. Citizens Bank Park is a legitimate homer-friendly, it's a bandbox. So their ownership is quite a bit higher than their top stack probability. But man, somebody that averages 1 strikeout a start is not someone I feel very confident in. If I'm the Washington Nationals throwing him on the bump today.
Yeah, that's just an absolute dream spot for the Phillies, I think. And I must have read that off as 15.9% last night because I would have laughed my ass off when I saw that. And it's right there in my spreadsheet too. So totally verifying 5.9 is real. For his career, he's only 14.8 and walks 10% of hitters. So he's just not a good pitcher. I mean, that 5.9 is lower than probably where he would finish. But yeah, he doesn't strike anybody out, can't be relied on, puts too many guys on base, and deals the home run. 179 home run per 9 to right-handed hitters for his career. So get some of those Phillies right-handed bats in there, the Rhys Hoskins of the world, McCutchen. I love this is an offense I like to go to all the time, even in tougher matchups than this. So in this matchup, even with a little bit of ownership imbalance, I like that spot. I would want to be above the field, I think, on that spot. And you're just swallow a little of the imbalance and just try and overwhelm it, really.
Yeah, just put balls in play at this point, and it's going to happen. It's a potent offense in Philadelphia. I definitely like it. They're one team that I don't mind, as you mentioned, getting a little bit overweight on. What about some other teams here? We're at the 9-minute mark, and for those of you, if you're still not comfortable, if you're trying to still work things in, hand building lineups, whatever, there's 2 games at 7:05. Then the next game isn't until 7:30. So you will have a little time if you're trying to rework things right when we get towards the end of the show. Terry, go ahead and take the baton here. Talk to me about some other teams, some stacks, some individual bats that you like, and then we'll round it out with some questions and our top pitchers.
So I think right off the top, one of the other team that I wrote up in the stack slants today, and they're still trending under-owned on both sites, is the White Sox. White Sox against Rich Hill, I think, is a great spot here. Hill's only striking out 15% of hitters so far, only 12 innings, small sample, but that's pretty much who he is these days. 11.8% walk rate, 501 xFIP, just not a good pitcher right now. We know about this White Sox lineup. They're another pricey team, particularly at the top 3 hitters, 5,700, 5,000, and 5,400 for Timmy, Eloy, and Abreu. But you get cheap fairly quick. You've got Edwin going off at 38 because he's been scuffling a little bit this year, but the power's still there in his bat. Luis Robert, only 4,500. Then you get down the bottom of the lineup, 2,900 for Nick Madrigal, who is a very high-end hit tool kid. Just came back, fills out second base, only drawing 1.3% ownership. Really like him to use as a wraparound backup to the top. That's how I wrote that one up this afternoon. No Joan Moncada in the lineup. He was dealing with some injuries. But you've got Grandal, looks like he's sitting. You got James McCann catching. So a little bit of a ding from their normal lineup, but I still think there's a ton of quality there. I think they could definitely get to Rich Hill here. Really like the spot for them. Flipping over, let's take a look at my home run model if I can get it to pop up here for some individual type of guys. Leading at the top of the home run model, we've got, I think he was my home run call for the day, was Juan Soto. Love the kid, love the spot. Howard on the Philly side, good high-end prospect of a kid, but always I'll take a big hitter, a big power bat against a rookie. Getting good power marks as a team overall, really, for Washington. Getting some for Cleveland, which is a little surprising against Keller. We talked about that spot. Let's see. Getting a little bit for Atlanta as well. Acuna is up top looking good. Freeman, I don't know if Acuna's actually in the lineup. This is a different page. Ozuna, Riley. So a lot of Atlanta bats popping a little bit here too. So that's just a little look at like the power index, if you want to call it that.
All right. People always love the dong of the day pick. Who would you go with?
I went with Soto, I think, in my column last night. So I'll stick with that one. So
that is your guy? Okay.
Yeah, that's my guy.
I like it. I'm gonna go Hoskins. He's been on a tear. He's got the platoon advantage. Great park. No, it's not. I promise I'm not being a homer. I absolutely hate this team. I hate this team. Been miserable lately, but I think that's a pretty viable spot for him, no question. And pitching. I also like Josh Bell, super cheap, and that team is going to have no ownership. If I were going with a contrarian stack, Pittsburgh would be the spot, but it's only so I can get up for pitching. It's a risky spot, but they get a great park shift going into Milwaukee. Whenever we're talking about teams like this, they could easily shit the bed. It's baseball. The best teams out there can shit the bed, right? So obviously the Pirates can do so. But favorable park shift, homer-friendly venue, a lefty. They don't strike out nearly as much against southpaws. They have better splits, markedly better splits to be exact. All right, and they're super cheap. Who would you say your contrarian stack is?
That's a really, really quality one. It might be, honestly, I talked about the White Sox just before, and like that's kind of a good answer, particularly with those two big bats coming out of the middle of their lineup. Just looking at ownership on some of these other ones, I think Boston's always interesting, but I think the more interesting one out of these is Tampa going up against Cole. We talked about how he's yielding some of those home runs. We talked about some of the quality bats in that lineup. On DK, they're getting a little tiny bit more ownership than they are getting probability of success. They're at the very bottom. They're next to last on the list. On FanDuel, they're drawing less ownership than they are probability of success. So that's a weird, like super offbeat one, kind of like the Pirates. So that would be the way I would go there. You've got just popping it up. You've got Brandon Lowy in there, G-Man Choi, maybe a Joey Wendell type of hitter. Kevin Kiermaier, sneaky, super late in the lineup there. So not a great lineup. No Austin Meadows in it today, but you can make it work.
Everyone's asking about Philly. I'm not a meteorologist, and I'm not going to pretend to be, but from everything I'm seeing, that rain looks like it's going to be almost entirely gone by around 8:30. So they're not going to, if the rain's going to be gone by 9, they're probably going to play, Terry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the kind of thing they're going to wait on. I mean, even if there's a delay, we're not really worried about rolling out starting pitching in any big shares in that game anyway. The bats are just going to wait, and the bats are going to be in the same spot, or maybe even get a bullpen game. Who knows? But yeah, I'm not concerned about the bats. If the meteorologists and everybody out there, the Ross of the world, are saying it's all right, then I wouldn't sweat it too much. And maybe you let the public get off of some of that Philly ownership, and we get them in an advantage.
That could definitely make
there's sharpness in spots like that. And real quick on the Pittsburgh take, any concerns about the Milwaukee bullpen after they chase Schruter out of there? I think he's getting a short start anyway. Yeah, very high-end bullpen.
There's no question I have some concerns about that. I can't imagine he's going to be in for long. I'm thinking you probably get what? I wouldn't be surprised in a spot like this. You probably get about 45 pitches from him. I don't think it's going to be a 10 or a 15 or 20. I think he goes a few innings. The bullpen is certainly concerning to me. That's why I would have much preferred Eric Lauer. But to put it simply, they're just dirt cheap. And if they do get the Schruter early, you're probably not getting your best long relief arms coming out of the bullpen if you go down big early in the game. So there's a clear correlation there. If Schruter comes in and shuts him down, it's not going to be pretty later in that game. But it's a good question and one that needs to be asked for sure. If you guys have any questions, go ahead, fire away. Terry, your favorite cheap pitcher you said is probably Keller, right?
Yeah, I think so. Let me just see on projections. That was I was on the tab with the top starters there. So I do like Max Fried, but he's not in that same price tier. Williams projecting a little bit weird for me, but I wouldn't go with it, and it's definitely not where Alex is in the DK projections. I think Keller. Alex seems to like Rich Hill a little bit. Decent, 13.9 projection on him, 14.15 on Keller. So he's got them pretty close. So I don't really like the spot for Rich Hill, but just looking at Alex's projections, I guess you can get away with that.
I wish I liked more cheap pitching, but man, there's not a lot to get excited about here at all. You're not playing Eric 5.9% K rate Fetty. Trevor Milwaukee is striking out at a second highest clip in the league against righties. Could you make an argument for that? Yeah, I guess, but Trevor Williams is not going to inspire much confidence whatsoever. So, it's tough there, which is the only reason why I think we spent some time talking about some cheap stacks today, because you're going to want to get some expensive bats into your line, or expensive pitching into your lineup for sure. Terry, that'll do it. We got 40 seconds. Let's see if we have any questions coming in here. Bell or Murphy?
Bell.
Okay. McCutchen or Ozuna?
Ooh, good one. Kutch.
All right, here's another similar one. Bell or McCutchen?
McCutchen.
Yeah, with you on all three of those. Everyone's stressing this rain, man. I think we're going to be all right. Sometimes you got to take those chances. You got to take
it. Exactly.
Who's your highest owned pitcher? Cole?
Click over to that. Yeah.
And highest owned stack?
I think it was Philly last I saw.
Oh, it was Philly. Okay. So you're not worried.
Yeah, I was getting to a lot of Philly.
Terry ain't scared. All right. Love it. Yeah. I definitely think we're getting the game. If not, well, I don't know, berate me or Mother Nature or God or whoever you think it is. It's until then, we'll see you guys back here soon. Hey, hit that thumbs up before you leave. Big help. Real big help. You know what I mean? Hit that thumbs up. Get us up to 300. I heard if you do, you usually have winning nights. That's just, the rumor has it. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with us. As always, for Terry, I'm Dave Loughran. We'll see you back here soon. And hit us up on Twitter. Hit that follow. DigitalB21. I'm going to ask you after the show where you got that from. And Laffy_D. Appreciate you guys and girls. We'll see you tomorrow. MLB Live Before Lock here on Awesemo.com. Where'd you get Digital B21 from?
Bad Religion song, 21st Century Digital Boy.